15 nasty rumors on black pastors. What if the very pastors who preached holiness were hiding the darkest secrets behind the pulpit? From whispered affairs and secret children to fraud schemes and cult-like control, these stories have shaken entire congregations and sparked debates that still rage today. Some leaders built massive followings, yet their reputations crumbled under the weight of scandal. Are these men of God unfairly targeted, or is there more truth than they'll ever admit? Stay with us as we uncover 15 nasty rumors on black pastors. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence for more untold truths. T.D. Jakes. Bishop Thomas Dexter Jakes, better known as T.D. Jakes, has long stood as one of the most recognizable figures in American Christianity. As the founder of the Potter's House in Dallas, a non-denominational megachurch with a membership surpassing 30,000 congregants, Jakes has built an empire that goes far beyond Sunday sermons. His ministry spans television broadcasts, best-selling books like Woman Thou Art Loosed music projects, and even film production through TDJ Enterprises. With such influence, it is no surprise that both admiration and controversy have followed him throughout his career. The most persistent rumors surrounding Jakes revolve around his wealth. Public reports and financial analyses estimate his net worth somewhere between $20 million and $150 million, though exact figures remain speculative. Critics argue that his luxurious lifestyle raises questions about transparency in ministry. Photos of his multi-million-dollar Dallas estate designer suits and the use of private jets often circulate online, sparking debate about whether a spiritual leader should live with such extravagance. While many pastors accept modest compensation, Jakes' success in publishing speaking engagements and conference ticket sales has blurred the line between minister and entrepreneur. It is important to note that T.D. Jakes has always defended his financial independence, clarifying that much of his income comes not from church offerings, but from his extensive business ventures. He has consistently emphasized that building wealth can be compatible with Christian values when managed responsibly. Still, the prosperity gospel debate resurfaces whenever his lifestyle is compared to the average working-class members sitting in his pews. Beyond the dollars and cents, Jakes has also faced criticism for his leadership style. Some critics describe the Potter's House as a tightly controlled environment where Jakes is both spiritual shepherd and corporate CEO. His conferences like Megafest and Woman Thou Art Loosed attract tens of thousands and generate millions in revenue, but they also reinforce the image of a ministry that operates on the scale of a global corporation. For his supporters, this scale is evidence of God's blessing. For his detractors, it is proof that faith has been commercialized. At the same time, T.D. Jakes has been praised for using his platform to address pressing social issues. He has spoken about race relations, mental health, and family restoration, often with a boldness that resonates with millions. His influence even extends to Hollywood with collaborations on films such as Heaven is for Real and Jumping the Broom. This crossover into mainstream entertainment has made him both more accessible and more controversial. But the central question persists: should a pastor live like a mogul while preaching to congregations full of ordinary people facing financial struggles? What do you think? Does wealth disqualify a preacher from being an authentic spiritual leader, or can it be a tool for greater impact? Despite the ongoing debates, Bishop T.D. Jakes remains an undeniable force in American religious life. His blend of business acumen, preaching, charisma, and cultural presence has made him one of the most influential pastors of his generation. Whether admired as a spiritual visionary or criticized as a prosperity preacher, Jakes embodies the complicated intersection of faith, wealth, and leadership in the modern era. Reverend Ike. Long before prosperity gospel became a buzzword in modern Christianity, one man embodied the movement so boldly that his name became synonymous with wealth and flamboyance from the pulpit: Reverend Ike. Born Frederick J. Ikerencutter II in 1935 in South Carolina, he rose to fame in the 1960s and 1970s by preaching a simple but provocative message that God wanted his people to be rich. While many pastors spoke about humility and sacrifice, Ike promised abundance and showcased his own lavish lifestyle as living proof of divine blessing. His ministry, based in New York City, quickly grew into one of the most recognizable religious movements of its era. At its peak, his congregation numbered in the thousands, and his radio and television broadcasts reached millions across the United States. He built his headquarters at the former Lowe's 175th Street Theater in Manhattan, transforming it into a church and cultural center that could hold over 5,000 people. Unlike traditional sermons, his messages often focused less on sin and repentance and more on visualization, positive thinking, and above all, financial success. What made Reverend Ike stand out and spark endless gossip was his unapologetic display of wealth. He drove multiple Rolls-Royces, owned luxury properties, and dressed in custom-made suits that rivaled Hollywood's elite. His jewelry collection, from gold chains to diamond rings, glittered under the lights as he preached. He once famously quipped, "The best thing you can do for the poor is not be one of them." For many, this statement captured both his philosophy and the controversy that surrounded him. His fundraising methods also fueled debate. Ike encouraged his followers to send money as a seed of faith, promising that God would multiply their contributions with financial blessings. While supporters believed in his message and testified to receiving miracles, critics accused him of exploiting people's desperation for wealth. In a time when many African Americans struggled with poverty and systemic inequality, Ike's promises of instant prosperity seemed both inspiring and suspicious. As the years went on, his ministry faced criticism from traditional church leaders who accused him of turning worship into a business. Journalists often questioned whether his empire was built on genuine faith or manipulation. Yet, despite the skepticism, Reverend Ike maintained a loyal following well into the 1990s, even as prosperity preachers like Kenneth Copeland and Creflo Dollar rose to prominence in his footsteps. Reverend Ike's legacy is complicated. On one hand, he was a trailblazer who dared to challenge the traditional idea that religion required poverty or austerity. On the other, he became a symbol of excess and materialism in the church, with rumors about his wealth often overshadowing his spiritual message. Reverend Ike passed away in 2009 at the age of 74, but his influence on prosperity preaching remains undeniable. He left behind a legacy of boldness, controversy, and a reminder of how easily faith and fortune can become entangled. Whether admired as a motivator or dismissed as a manipulator, Reverend Ike carved out a place in history as one of the most flamboyant and talked-about pastors of the 20th century. Jasper Williams, Jr. When Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul, passed away in August 2018, her funeral at Detroit's Greater Grace Temple was meant to be a celebration of life and legacy. The ceremony drew celebrities, dignitaries, and millions of viewers worldwide, tuning in through live broadcasts to honor one of the most iconic singers in American history. But instead of leaving people inspired, the event became remembered for the controversy surrounding one man, Pastor Jasper Williams, Jr. Williams, a senior pastor from Salem Bible Church in Atlanta, had been handpicked by Franklin's family to deliver her eulogy. With decades of experience in ministry and a reputation as a skilled orator, he seemed like the right choice. Yet what unfolded over nearly 50 minutes left audiences shocked and divided. Rather than focusing on Franklin's achievements or her musical and cultural impact, Williams shifted into social commentary. He spoke about the decline of Black families, emphasizing the absence of fathers in homes and suggesting that single mothers could not properly raise sons. These remarks sparked instant backlash. Viewers in the church grew visibly uncomfortable, and Franklin's own family members appeared distressed. Social media erupted with criticism, accusing Williams of hijacking a sacred moment to advance his personal agenda. For many, it was seen as deeply disrespectful to Franklin's memory, a time for tribute turned into a platform for politics and judgment. The sermon drew headlines nationwide, overshadowing the performances and heartfelt tributes that had otherwise defined the day. What made the moment particularly controversial was the setting. Funerals are typically occasions for comfort and unity, not debate or confrontation. By introducing topics like fatherhood crime and single-parent households, Williams appeared tone-deaf to the expectations of mourners who wanted to remember Franklin's extraordinary contributions to music and civil rights. Critics accused him of reinforcing negative stereotypes, rather than uplifting the black community. In the days that followed, Franklin's family publicly distanced themselves from Williams's remarks. Aretha's nephew, Vaughn Franklin, stated that his comments did not reflect the family's views and that they were offensive and distasteful. Civil rights leaders and fellow pastors also criticized him, arguing that he had disrespected both Aretha Franklin and the broader community by focusing on divisive issues rather than unity. The scandal left Williams defending himself in interviews. He insisted that his words were taken out of context and that he had meant to highlight social challenges facing African Americans. Yet for many observers, the damage was done. His reputation became tied less to decades of ministry and more to one speech that seemed to place blame rather than provide comfort. Today, Williams remains a respected pastor in Atlanta, but the shadow of that eulogy lingers. It serves as a reminder of how a single speech delivered in the wrong tone at the wrong time can spark national outrage and permanently shape a legacy. For some, he is remembered as a powerful preacher unafraid of hard truths. For others, he is the man who turned a queen's farewell into a storm of controversy. Clarence McClendon. For a time in the 1990s, Bishop Clarence McClendon was seen as one of the brightest rising stars in the world of televangelism. Known for his charismatic sermons, dynamic presence, and growing influence on Christian television, McClendon built a reputation as both a spiritual teacher and a visionary leader. He led churches in Los Angeles, hosted programs watched nationwide, and was often invited to speak at major Christian conferences. With his combination of eloquence, energy, and musical background, many believed he would become one of the next great leaders of the American church. But that promising trajectory soon collided with controversy. Rumors began swirling in the early 2000s when McClendon's marriage to his wife, Priscilla, abruptly ended. Their union had long been viewed as an example of a strong Christian marriage, and the sudden divorce shocked many in his congregation. What made matters worse were the whispers that began to spread claims that McClendon had been unfaithful, that affairs were involved, and that his private life did not match the moral standards he preached from the pulpit. Instead of fading quietly, the divorce unfolded in a way that drew public attention. Church members, fellow pastors, and the media all speculated about the reasons behind the separation. Some alleged that McClendon had been romantically linked to women in the entertainment industry, while others suggested the affair may have involved someone closer to his ministry. The absence of concrete details left room for gossip to grow unchecked. The fallout was immediate. Television networks that once aired his sermons began to pull back, hesitant to associate with a pastor under such scrutiny. Invitations to speak at large conferences slowed. Within his own church, attendance dipped as some congregants lost faith in his leadership. To many, the scandal exposed a troubling gap between his public image and private choices. McClendon himself tried to control the narrative through interviews and statements, but his responses often raised more questions than they answered. He spoke about human weakness and the challenges of ministry, but never fully denied the affair allegations. That silence fueled speculation that there was indeed more truth to the rumors than he was willing to admit. Meanwhile, critics seized on the controversy as an example of hypocrisy in the church, a man preaching fidelity and holiness while allegedly failing to live up to those ideals. The rise of social media only magnified the storm. Old photos of McClendon with his former wife were recirculated with sarcastic captions. Video clips of his sermons on marriage and morality were posted alongside accusations of hypocrisy. In the court of public opinion, his credibility was damaged, even if no official misconduct was proven. So the pressing question remains: can a spiritual leader recover from such personal scandals, or does a broken reputation permanently overshadow the message they once preached? Despite the controversies, McClendon has continued to minister lead worship and release music. though his reputation carries the scars of past scandals. His story stands as a reminder of how quickly a promising ministry can be derailed by personal choices, and how difficult it is to rebuild trust once doubt takes root. For many, he remains a talented preacher, but his name will always be linked to whispers of betrayal and the downfall of a once rising star. Jesse Jackson. For decades, Reverend Jesse Jackson was a towering figure in American life. A Baptist minister, civil rights activist, political candidate, and moral voice for justice. He marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., founded the Rainbow Push Coalition, and even ran twice for President of the United States, breaking barriers as one of the most prominent African American leaders of the late 20th century. With such an impressive legacy, many saw Jackson as not only a political force, but also a guardian of family values and Christian morality. That's why the scandal that erupted in 2001 shook so many people. Rumors had circulated for years that Jackson was secretly supporting a child born outside of his marriage. When the truth finally came to light, it was confirmed that he had fathered a daughter, Ashley, with Karen Stanford, a staff member of his Rainbow Push organization. Jackson admitted the relationship, publicly acknowledging both the affair and his responsibility for the child's upbringing. The revelation was devastating not only for his family, but also for his public reputation. At the time, Jackson was counseling President Bill Clinton during the Monica Lewinsky scandal, offering moral and spiritual advice on the importance of fidelity and responsibility. The irony was impossible to ignore. Here was a man preaching about commitment while hiding his own extramarital relationship. Critics quickly seized on the hypocrisy, accusing him of living a double life. The details made the story even more explosive. Reports revealed that Jackson had been providing monthly financial support for his daughter while keeping the situation secret from the public. For an activist who often criticized absentee fathers in the black community, the contradiction was glaring. Civil rights leaders, political allies, and the media all questioned how much the scandal would diminish his credibility as a national leader. The timing also raised eyebrows. The affair reportedly occurred during the late 1990s, overlapping with the period when Jackson was providing spiritual counsel to President Clinton. To some, this made his advice appear hollow. To others, it highlighted the universal struggles of even the most celebrated leaders. Jackson issued statements taking responsibility, asking for forgiveness from his family and supporters. Still, the damage was done. Though he remained active in politics and social justice, his moral authority was permanently questioned. To this day, the scandal remains a footnote to his legacy, overshadowing some of the good he accomplished in civil rights and poverty advocacy. Despite the controversy, Jackson continued to fight for civil rights, addressing issues like voting rights, healthcare, and economic equality. He also faced health struggles in recent years, including a Parkinson's diagnosis in 2017, which slowed but did not silence his voice. Yet when people look back at his career, they cannot ignore the tension between his public advocacy for strong families and the private choices that contradicted those very values. Reverend Jesse Jackson remains a complex figure, admired as a civil rights pioneer, criticized for personal failings, and remembered as a man whose human flaws collided with a life of extraordinary public impact. Jeremiah Wright. For more than 3 decades, Reverend Jeremiah A. Wright Jr. was a respected and powerful voice in Chicago's South Side. As pastor of Trinity United Church of Christ, he transformed a modest congregation of 87 members in the 1970s into a community of more than 8,000 worshipers by the time he retired in 2008. Wright's preaching style blended black liberation theology with fiery social commentary, resonating deeply with African Americans who longed for messages of empowerment, cultural pride, and justice. For his followers, he was a spiritual father. But for the broader public, he became a household name because of one man, Barack Obama. Wright was Obama's pastor for about 20 years, officiating his wedding and baptizing his children. At first, this connection was seen as a symbol of Obama's roots in the black church tradition. But during the 2008 presidential campaign, clips of Wright's old sermons surfaced, igniting a media firestorm that threatened to derail Obama's historic run for the White House. The most infamous soundbite came from a sermon where Wright thundered, "Goddamn America," a statement he explained as a condemnation of systemic racism and government policies that oppressed minorities. Other clips included controversial remarks about the September 11th attacks and U.S. foreign policy, which Wright described as America's chickens coming home to roost. Once these videos hit mainstream news, the narrative shifted dramatically. Was Obama aligned with a radical pastor who despised his own country? Political opponents seized on the controversy, painting Wright as anti-American and suggesting that Obama secretly shared his pastor's views. Supporters of Obama countered that the remarks were being taken out of context, stripped from sermons that also contained messages of hope and healing. Still, the damage was undeniable. National polls in March 2008 showed that Obama's favorability ratings dipped as the Wright controversy dominated headlines. Wright himself did little to calm the storm. Instead of retreating quietly, he gave several high-profile interviews and delivered a fiery speech at the National Press Club defending his record and doubling down on his critiques of racism in America. Critics argued that Wright enjoyed the spotlight and may have even resented Obama's rapid rise. The suspicion grew that the pastor was deliberately feeding controversy to stay relevant. This left Obama with no choice but to publicly distance himself. In a major speech on race in Philadelphia, Obama acknowledged the pain caused by Wright's words while still recognizing the role the church had played in his own spiritual journey. Eventually, he severed ties altogether, stating that Wright's comments did not reflect his own beliefs. The fallout was lasting. To many conservatives, Wright became the face of radical preaching in America. To many progressives, he was an unfairly maligned figure whose prophetic voice was taken out of context. To his congregation, he remained a beloved pastor who had given decades of service. Kirby John Caldwell. For years, Pastor Kirby John H. Caldwell was celebrated as one of the most influential ministers in America. Born in Houston, Texas in 1953, Caldwell graduated from Carleton College and earned an MBA from the Wharton School of Business before entering ministry. His sharp intellect and financial expertise set him apart from many pastors, making him a bridge between the church business world and politics. As senior pastor of Windsor Village United Methodist Church in Houston, he grew the congregation into one of the largest Methodist churches in the United States, with more than 14,000 members at its peak. Caldwell also advised U.S. presidents, including George W. Bush and Barack Obama, further cementing his reputation as a respected national leader. But that remarkable career took a shocking turn when Caldwell was caught at the center of a financial scandal that destroyed his credibility. Beginning around 2013, he and a business partner persuaded investors to put millions of dollars into what they claimed were historical Chinese bonds. These bonds, printed in the early 20th century, had long been considered worthless collectibles, with no value in modern markets. Caldwell, however, assured people, many of them church members, that the bonds could be redeemed for massive profits. Federal investigators later revealed that more than $3.5 million was raised through the scheme. Many of the victims trusted Caldwell not just as a businessman, but as their pastor. Prosecutors accused him of using his respected position in the church to lend credibility to what was essentially a fraudulent investment operation. In reality, investors lost their money while Caldwell and his partner pocketed large sums for personal use. In 2021, Caldwell was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud. He was also ordered to pay nearly $6 million in restitution. For a man once known as a spiritual counselor to presidents and a pioneer in faith-based community development, the fall from grace was steep and devastating. The scandal rattled Windsor Village United Methodist Church and shocked religious communities across the country. Many struggled to reconcile the image of a trusted pastor with the reality of a convicted felon. Critics pointed to the dangers of blending ministry with high-stakes business ventures, while supporters lamented how quickly decades of service could be overshadowed by one scandal. Today, Caldwell's story stands as one of the most infamous examples of financial misconduct by a pastor. It highlights the power of trust, how easily it can be built over years, and how quickly it can be broken by deception. For many of his followers, the pain was not only financial but spiritual, leaving them questioning both their faith in him and at times the church itself. Pastor Kirby John Caldwell's rise and fall illustrate the delicate balance between faith, money, and power. Once praised as a visionary leader, he will forever carry the stain of a scandal that transformed him from presidential advisor to prisoner. Paul Morton. Bishop Paul Sylvester Morton has spent decades shaping the Black church in America. Born in 1950, he rose to prominence as the founding bishop of the Full Gospel Baptist Church Fellowship International, an organization that reshaped how Baptists embrace the gifts of the Holy Spirit. Known as a preacher, singer, and author, Morton also pastored Greater St. Stephen Full Gospel Baptist Church in New Orleans, where under his leadership the congregation reportedly grew into the largest African-American church in Louisiana with tens of thousands of members. His combination of fiery sermons and gospel music made him both a spiritual leader and a cultural force. But along with influence came controversy. Rumors began circulating about Morton's leadership style and how he managed church affairs. Critics suggested that he ran his ministry like a tightly controlled family empire rather than a collaborative community of believers. The whispers grew louder when observers noticed how many of his relatives held significant roles in the church structure. Some alleged that his children and close family members were placed in positions of power regardless of qualifications. To skeptics, this looked less like spiritual stewardship and more like nepotism. Financial transparency also became a subject of debate. As Greater St. Stephen grew into a multi-million-dollar organization, questions arose about how donations were being handled. Members and outsiders alike sometimes complained that financial details were not shared openly, leaving room for speculation. Morton's critics accused him of guarding church finances too closely and treating the institution as if it were his personal kingdom. Supporters countered that he was simply protecting the integrity of the ministry from outside interference. Despite the chatter, Morton's impact on gospel music and preaching has been undeniable. He recorded multiple albums including Cry Your Last Tear with the Full Gospel Baptist Church Fellowship Mass Choir, which won a Stellar Award in 2010. His songs have been celebrated across congregations nationwide, and his ability to merge preaching with music has drawn countless followers. Yet in many discussions, the admiration for his artistry exists alongside suspicion about his organizational leadership. What makes his story even more complex is the loyalty of his congregation. For every critic who questioned Morton's methods, there were thousands who defended him as a man of vision, who built opportunities for African-American churches to grow in independence and influence. His role in expanding the reach of the Full Gospel Fellowship cannot be understated. It gave pastors across the country a new platform to embrace Pentecostal worship while staying connected to their Baptist roots. Still, the rumors of control persist. With such centralized authority, some wonder if Morton blurred the line between serving God's kingdom and securing his own. What do you think is placing family in leadership positions a natural extension of trust? Or does it compromise the integrity of a ministry? Even after his retirement in 2020 as presiding bishop of the Full Gospel Fellowship, Morton's name continues to stir debate. His contributions to gospel music and Black church growth are celebrated, but the whispers about tight control and family favoritism remain part of his complicated legacy. In the end, Bishop Paul Morton embodies both the triumphs and tensions that come with leading a movement, a man praised for his vision, yet shadowed by persistent rumors about power and control. Tony Alamo. Few religious figures in America generated as much fear and fascination as Tony Alamo, a man whose ministry shifted from fiery evangelical preaching to something many described as a full-blown cult. Born Bernie Lazar Hoffman in 1934, he reinvented himself as Tony Alamo in the 1960s, claiming a dramatic conversion to Christianity. Alongside his wife Susan, he founded the Tony and Susan Alamo Christian Foundation in Hollywood, initially attracting followers with street preaching, free meals, and promises of salvation. By the 1970s, the movement had grown into a nationwide network with compounds in Arkansas and elsewhere, and thousands of people calling Alamo their spiritual leader. But beneath the surface, troubling rumors began to emerge. Former members described a community ruled by fear and absolute obedience to Alamo. He enforced strict rules on daily life, dictating how followers dressed, ate, and even whom they could marry. Members were required to turn over all possessions and earnings to the church, effectively making them financially dependent on him. Businesses run by Alamo's followers, from clothing manufacturing to distribution, generated millions, yet little of that wealth seemed to benefit ordinary members. As the years went on, Alamo's paranoia deepened. He often preached about government conspiracies, claiming that authorities were persecuting him because of his faith. Critics, however, pointed to mounting evidence of exploitation and abuse. Stories spread of families torn apart when one member tried to leave the Church, of children forced into grueling labor, and of loyalty being tested through bizarre and humiliating rituals. The most damning accusations came in the 1990s and 2000s. Former followers and law enforcement investigations revealed disturbing allegations of sexual misconduct. In 2009, Alamo was convicted on 10 counts of transporting underage girls across state lines for sex. Prosecutors detailed how he groomed minors, some as young as 8, coercing them into marriages under the guise of religious practice. The evidence was overwhelming, and Alamo was sentenced to 175 years in federal prison, ensuring he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. He died in 2017 at the age of 82, still claiming he was the victim of a government plot. For many Americans, Alamo's story became a symbol of how charismatic leaders can twist faith into a tool for control and abuse. His followers once sold records and tapes of his fiery sermons across the country, but in the end, his legacy was defined not by salvation, but by scandal. The remnants of his ministry have dissolved, and the compounds that once housed his followers stand as eerie reminders of what happens when devotion is manipulated for personal gain. While some still defend his teachings, the majority see Tony Alamo not as a preacher, but as a manipulator who cloaked abuse in the language of faith. His name endures as one of the darkest cautionary tales in American religious history. Gino Jennings. Pastor Gino Jennings has built a reputation as one of the most uncompromising voices in American Christianity. As the leader of the First Church of Our Lord Jesus Christ, founded in 1984 in Philadelphia, he has attracted thousands of members both in the United States and abroad. His sermons are broadcast online and have garnered millions of views, making him one of the most recognizable independent pastors of his generation. Jennings is known for fiery, no-nonsense preaching that tackles sin, social issues, and what he calls false teachings in other churches. But along with his rising influence came controversy. Jennings's critics often describe him as overly harsh, using fear and intimidation rather than compassion to lead his congregation. His messages frequently include strict rules about personal appearance and lifestyle, especially for women. He has denounced makeup, jewelry, certain hairstyles, and modern clothing, insisting that modesty is a biblical requirement. Women in his church are expected to wear long dresses or skirts and cover their bodies, a standard that Jennings defends as scriptural, but others view as oppressive. Beyond dress codes, Jennings often targets other pastors directly from the pulpit, calling out well-known ministers by name. He has criticized prosperity preachers like T.D. Jakes, Creflo Dollar, and Joel Osteen, labeling them false teachers who mislead people with messages focused on wealth rather than salvation. His sermons sometimes resemble public roast sessions as he dismantles the doctrines of rival ministers, sparking heated debates among Christians. To his followers, this boldness makes him a modern-day prophet, unafraid to tell the truth. To his detractors, it makes him divisive and arrogant. Jennings also rejects many mainstream Christian traditions. He condemns the use of Christmas and Easter as religious holidays, arguing they are pagan in origin. He strongly opposes same-sex marriage, LGBTQ+ rights, and interfaith cooperation stances that have drawn widespread criticism in recent years. His rhetoric, often sharp and uncompromising, has been described by some as hateful, while supporters praise him for refusing to compromise biblical teaching. Despite the controversy, Jennings has successfully built an international following. His church has expanded to multiple states and countries with congregations in Africa, the Caribbean, and Europe. His online presence is also formidable. Sermons on YouTube regularly surpass hundreds of thousands of views, and his clips are widely shared across social media. Even those who disagree with him admit that his delivery is magnetic, drawing in audiences, whether they love him or hate him. What makes Jennings particularly unique is his ability to thrive outside traditional denominational structures. Without the backing of a historic church organization, he has built a movement largely through grassroots growth and digital media. His sermons spark conversation and debate, not just within his congregation but across the global Christian community. Whether praised as bold or condemned as extreme, Jennings embodies the tension between uncompromising faith and the demand for compassion in modern ministry. Darrell Scott. Pastor Darrell Scott rose to prominence not only as a preacher, but also as one of the most visible evangelical supporters of former President Donald Trump. As the senior pastor of the New Spirit Revival Center in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, Scott was known locally for his passionate sermons and leadership. But nationally, he became a household name when he aligned himself closely with Trump during the 2016 presidential campaign and afterward serving as a member of Trump's National Diversity Coalition. This unusual role for a black pastor drew both praise and criticism, launching him into the center of a political storm. Scott defended his support for Trump as a matter of pragmatism, claiming the president was committed to addressing urban poverty, criminal justice reform, and economic opportunity in African American communities. He frequently appeared on television as a surrogate, speaking on Trump's behalf and countering critics who accused the administration of neglecting minorities. His loyalty was rewarded with increased visibility, access to political power, and invitations to high-profile White House meetings. But with that visibility came a wave of rumors. Critics inside and outside the church began whispering that Scott's closeness to Trump was less about principle and more about personal gain. Questions swirled over whether his loyalty had been influenced by promises of influence money or access to political circles. Some alleged that Scott used his relationship with Trump to build his own brand rather than to serve his congregation. To his detractors, he symbolized the dangers of blending politics and ministry too tightly. The backlash was sharpest among those who felt betrayed by his alliance with a president, often accused of fostering racial division. Other pastors publicly criticized Scott, arguing that his actions made it harder for the black church to maintain credibility as a moral voice in American life. Even within his own community, some members distanced themselves from his outspoken political advocacy. Adding to the controversy were whispers about Scott's personal business dealings. Rumors circulated that he had used his political connections to secure financial opportunities, though concrete evidence never surfaced. Nevertheless, the perception stuck that his rise to prominence had as much to do with politics as it did with preaching. Despite the criticism, Scott remained defiant. He insisted that his work with Trump was sincere, pointing to initiatives on criminal justice reform and urban development as proof that his involvement had tangible benefits. He often framed himself as a bridge builder, willing to work with any administration to bring change to marginalized communities. Regardless of where one stands, Pastor Darrell Scott's story highlights the complicated intersection of faith and politics. For his supporters, he was a courageous leader who used his influence to gain a seat at the table of power. For his critics, he was a pastor who traded the pulpit for political spotlight. His journey shows how quickly religious leaders can become lightning rods when they step into the political arena where every alliance invites scrutiny and every motive is questioned. Marvin Winans. Pastor Marvin Lawrence Winans, a celebrated gospel singer and senior pastor of Perfecting Church in Detroit, has long been admired for his music ministry and powerful preaching. Born in 1958, he is a member of the legendary Winans gospel family known worldwide for their Grammy-winning harmonies and devotion to faith. Marvin carved his own path as both a pastor and artist, blending spiritual leadership with a deep connection to music that touched millions. Yet for all his accomplishments, one incident in 2012 put him in the headlines for reasons far removed from gospel or ministry, a late-night carjacking. In May of that year, Winans reported being robbed at a Detroit gas station. According to police records, he was pumping gas into his luxury SUV, a 2012 Infiniti QX56, when a group of men assaulted him and drove off with the vehicle. The story quickly made local and national news, partly because it highlighted Detroit's ongoing struggle with violent crime, and partly because the victim was such a high-profile religious figure. Winans himself described the event in interviews, noting that he was left shaken but unharmed physically. However, as the story spread, skepticism grew. Some observers questioned why a pastor would be driving such an expensive vehicle late at night alone in an area known for crime. Others wondered about the exact circumstances of the attack, pointing out inconsistencies in early reports. Rumors began swirling that the story was not as straightforward as it seemed. Was Winans targeted because of his status and wealth? Or was there something more to the incident? The SUV was eventually recovered, and several suspects were arrested, confirming that the crime itself had taken place. Yet the gossip did not die down. Critics speculated that the attention surrounding the event was magnified because of Winans's celebrity status. Some argued that the narrative played into Detroit's struggles with violence in a way that was both sensationalized and symbolic. Supporters, however, defended him, insisting that he was a victim who should not be blamed for being attacked. The controversy deepened when documents revealed that Winans had an outstanding warrant for unpaid traffic tickets at the time of the carjacking. Although unrelated to the robbery, the revelation added fuel to critics' claims that the pastor's public image was not as spotless as his sermons suggested. For a man leading a congregation and carrying the family's gospel legacy, even minor infractions became talking points in the court of public opinion. In the end, the carjacking did not derail Winans's ministry. He continues to pastor Perfecting Church and perform gospel music, maintaining influence within both spiritual and artistic communities. Yet the 2012 incident remains part of his story, remembered not just as a crime, but as a moment that exposed the complicated ways fame, wealth, and faith intersect in public life. Ralph West. Pastor Ralph Douglas West, affectionately known as Paz, is the founder and senior pastor of the Church Without Walls in Houston, Texas. Since establishing the ministry in 1987, starting with just a handful of members, he has grown it into a thriving congregation of over 24,000 people, making it one of the largest churches in the city. Known for his eloquence, deep biblical knowledge, and ability to connect with everyday struggles, West has built a reputation as a trusted leader in both religious and civic circles. His sermons, often broadcast on television and digital platforms, have reached audiences far beyond Houston. Yet behind the acclaim, Pastor West has faced a shadow of controversy. Over the years, whispers began to circulate about troubles in his personal life, particularly regarding his marriage. Church gossip suggested that his relationship was strained, and eventually rumors of divorce began to spread. Alongside those claims came speculation about possible extramarital affairs. Some claim to have seen him in the company of women who were not his wife, while others dismissed the allegations as baseless chatter fueled by jealousy and scrutiny of a man in the spotlight. The situation was made more complicated by West's decision not to publicly address the rumors in detail. His silence, meant perhaps to keep his private life separate from his ministry, only fueled more speculation. For many observers, the lack of explanation left a vacuum that gossip quickly filled. Supporters argued that he was protecting his family from unnecessary exposure, while critics claimed that his avoidance raised more questions than answers. Within the church, the rumors sparked heated conversations. Some members felt disillusioned, questioning whether their pastor practiced what he preached from the pulpit. Others remained loyal, emphasizing his decades of faithful leadership and insisting that personal struggles should not overshadow spiritual contributions. The divide reflected a larger tension about how much transparency congregations should demand from their leaders. Media coverage, though limited compared to more sensational scandals, also played a role in amplifying the whispers. Blogs and forums that focus on church life picked up the story with anonymous sources and unverified claims, adding layers of drama. The narrative became less about verified facts and more about perception, a dangerous territory for anyone in public ministry. Despite the challenges, Pastor Ralph West has continued to preach, teach, and lead. His sermons remain widely respected. His church continues to grow, and he is still considered one of the most influential pastors in Texas. However, the rumors of divorce and alleged affairs linger, forming a parallel narrative to his otherwise successful ministry. For some, Ralph West's story is a reminder that even the most admired leaders are human facing personal struggles that can ripple into public view. For others, it is a test of faith, not only in their pastor, but in their ability to separate the man from the message. John Gray. Pastor John Gray once embodied the image of a modern celebrity preacher. As a former associate pastor at Lakewood Church under Joel Osteen, Gray quickly rose in prominence with his dynamic preaching style and humor-filled delivery. He later became the senior pastor of Relentless Church in Greenville, South Carolina, where thousands tuned into his sermons both in person and online. Gray also expanded his influence through television, hosting The Book of John Gray on OWN Oprah Winfrey's network, blending ministry with reality TV. But his fame has often been eclipsed by personal controversy. Beginning in 2018, reports emerged of infidelity scandals. Gray admitted to what he called emotional unfaithfulness to his wife Aventer, though he denied physical affairs at first. Yet leaked videos, phone calls, and allegations from women claiming to have had relationships with him continued to surface. Each new wave of gossip reignited public debate about his integrity and leadership. The pattern became familiar. A scandal would break. Gray would issue a tearful apology, often accompanied by grand gestures like gifting his wife a luxury car, and then promises of change would follow. But soon new allegations would arise, keeping his name in the headlines more for his personal failings than his sermons. These incidents hit especially hard because Gray often preached about marriage fidelity and commitment. Critics accused him of hypocrisy, while supporters urged forgiveness, pointing to his transparency and willingness to admit mistakes. Still, the cycle damaged his reputation and weakened his authority in the eyes of many churchgoers. The financial aspect of his lifestyle also raised eyebrows. Critics questioned his purchase of expensive cars, including a Lamborghini for his wife, arguing that it sent the wrong message during a time when many in his congregation struggled financially. Gray defended the purchase as a personal gift not connected to church funds, but the optics fed into broader debates about prosperity preachers and excess. Despite the controversies, John Gray continues to lead, preach, and maintain a loyal following. His sermons still resonate with thousands, and his charisma remains undeniable. Yet his story illustrates how repeated scandals can overshadow ministry, leaving a leader defined more by personal headlines than by spiritual guidance. Charles Edward Blake. Bishop Charles Edward Blake Sr. stands as one of the most influential leaders in American Christianity. As the presiding bishop of the Church of God in Christ Kojic from 2007 to 2021, he led a denomination with over 6 million members worldwide, making it one of the largest Pentecostal bodies in the world. Known for his eloquent statesmanship and advocacy for social issues, Blake was often seen as a stabilizing figure who carried forward the legacy of Kojic into the 21st century. Yet even at the highest levels of church leadership, controversy was never far away. Throughout his tenure, Blake faced persistent rumors of misconduct and abuse of power. Critics accused him of being too authoritarian in his leadership style, centralizing decision-making, and maintaining tight control over church governance. Others went further, alleging inappropriate behavior behind the scenes. Though none of these allegations were ever proven in court, they circulated in blogs, church gossip circles, and even tabloid articles, creating a cloud of suspicion. For many, the whispers were troubling precisely because Blake represented millions of believers. If the leader at the top faced such rumors, what did it say about the accountability within the denomination? Supporters rallied to his defense, pointing to his decades of service, his global humanitarian work, and his consistent denial of any wrongdoing. To them, the allegations were nothing more than attempts to tarnish a man of faith who had devoted his life to the church. The persistence of the rumors, however, revealed the fragile trust between congregants and leadership in megachurch organizations. When figures become larger than life, every whisper becomes magnified, and every accusation, whether true or not, leaves a stain. Despite the gossip, Bishop Blake retired in 2021, with his reputation largely intact among official circles. He continues to be honored for his contributions to both church and society, including his involvement in initiatives against HIV/AIDS and his advocacy for justice and equality. Yet the lingering talk about alleged misconduct remains part of his legacy, a reminder that leadership at the highest level is always vulnerable to scrutiny. Bishop Charles Edward Blake's story shows the double-edged sword of spiritual authority. The greater the influence, the heavier the weight of public suspicion. His life demonstrates both the power of visionary leadership and the shadow of rumors that follow even the most respected pastors. The stories of these 15 pastors show just how thin the line can be between faith, fame, and scandal. Some built empires that inspired millions, while others became cautionary tales of greed, betrayal, and broken trust. Yet one question remains: are these leaders victims of relentless gossip, or do the rumors reveal uncomfortable truths about power in the pulpit? Their legacies are complicated, their reputations debated, and the conversation is far from over. What do you think? Can a preacher truly separate personal flaws from spiritual authority? Share your thoughts below and stay tuned to Legends of Black Excellence.